Levantine and Ugaritic traditions, Mot, Baal, shades of Canaanite eschatology, gates and thresholds, 7 doors, no, but boundaries of dust and house. You see, where the word is a ledger and the Greek shore a managed pier, the Levant subterranean imagination is a mix of palace drama and harsh shadow, a place where gods quarrel with drought and kingship, and where ordinary dirt slide into the same muted field called Sheol, or the House of Shades. The myths from Ugaritic give us theatre, Baal's absence, Anat's fury, Mot's appetite, while the Israelite corpus often supplies a bleaker social bottom line. All go down to Sheol in one way or another. So, the threshold is not usually a neat set of bolted doors like Ishtar's or Inanna's 7 gates. Instead, the Levantine border is a landscape of absence and seizure. Ugaritic texts present the descent motive as encounter and removal. Baal is seized or falls to Mot's realm. The land itself soars in his absence. Mot in these poems is more a personified force of devouring sterility than a neat cosmic manager. His coming means drought and the cessation of the king's fecund power. And the dramatic images, pits, thrones of sand, and messengers returning with the news of a god's disappearance, serve as threshold features. When Mot comes, borders between life and death, field and fallow, are breached. So, practically speaking, the region's funerary technologies are less about elaborate gate and more about household and cultic maintenance. Archaeology and epigraphic traces across the Levant show local burial customs. Ancestral remembrance, yet again, remembrance is important, and offerings at tombs or high places. And these practices function as a civic apparatus that keeps names alive and mitigates the gloom of Sheol. Where myth dramatizes divine absence and seasonal rupture, lived ritual addresses the social problem of being remembered, feeding ancestors, reciting genealogies, and staging cultic feasts that bind families to their dead. The contrast is important. The Baal-Mot cycle explains drought and kingship anxiety. Household rites answer the everyday fear of being forgotten. So there you have it again. Remembrance in the afterlife is crucial, so don't forget your beloved ones. Anyway, picture a valley of cracked earth. A messenger comes on a mountain and pronounces that Baal sleeps in the pits. That Mot has eaten the king's shadow. The sun goddess Shapash peers down. Anat arms herself and storms toward the pits. The people watch from their threshing floors. That is the Levantine threshold in action. Not a door with a doorman, but a rupture in the world's productive order, announced by myth and answered by cult. For everyday mortals, the analogues, moment is quieter and domestic. The tomb is tended, offerings are made, and names are kept in speech, so that even in Sheol, the dead are not quite erased. If Inanna's or Ishtar's corridor requires the right stripping of raiment, the Levantine threshold requires the right weather reports, so to speak. When Baal is absent, the harvest fails. When a household forgets, the shade fades. So, keep both your rituals and your rain prayers up to date. Transit and messengers, descent, negotiation, and the hard hospitality of Mot. Transit in the Levantine imagination is a bit rougher, more dramatic business than a ferry ticket exchange. It is descent, seizure, negotiation, and sometimes violent rescue. Where Greeks picture Charon and the Egyptians sketch an hour-by-hour itinerary, Ugaritic poetry stages gods being taken into Mot's realm, messengers running between court and furious divine relatives digging at hid doors. The movement into the underworld is therefore often a public political act. A god's absence reshapes the land, and the myths show that return is possible but exceptional, usually the result of forced trickery or the god's intervention rather than routine ritual technology. So, Baal's fall to Mot is the classic transit scene. In the Baal cycle, Baal is effectively seized by Mot, or lured into a fatal encounter, and removed from his palace. The sky darkens, the land goes quiet, and the community's productive order falters. And this is not an inward private ascent. It is a public catastrophe that demands response. Messengers and the sun goddess Shapash run between courts. Anat arms herself and storms toward the pit. The narrative mechanics emphasize negotiation and force. Anat's furious campaign, the feast and funerary gestures offered for Baal, and finally divine pronouncements that restore, or at least reconfigure, order. Such episodes make transit into Mot's realm a matter of state, a mythic parable about kingship, fertility, and the risk of drought when a storm god is absent. Key figures of transit and mediation appear again and again. Shapash, aka the sun, as the sky's witness, functions as messenger and eye. She reports on the pit, aids searchers, and in some episodes besieges the underworld. Anat is the rather violent rescuer. She digs, she slays, she scatters Mot's remains in one version, and her action frames the narrative as one of family loyalty and theatrical reversal. Mot himself is not a mere place, but a personified power whose appetite and hostility must be placated or challenged. His character makes the transit dangerous and absolute, unless the gods intervene. These roles show that movement in the Levantine corpus is politicized. Yet again, transit is the site of negotiation between divine houses rather than a technical passage dependent on human rights alone. Contrast this with Israelite Sheol. Biblical texts tend to treat descent as a social finality rather than a scene of cosmic negotiation. Sheol is often described as the common house of the dead, a shadowy pit of silence and forgetfulness, where both great and small go alike. There's little theatrical rescue in canonical Hebrew scripture. The emphasis is on lineage, memory, and the ways the living must honor the dead to keep them present, in a communal sense, of course. So, put simply, Ugaritic gives us the mythic drama of God being taken and recovered. Israeli texts give us the sober fact that most mortals go down to the same silent place, and what matters is not their return, but how the living remember them. Local practice and poetic purpose explain the difference. In Ugaritic, myths about Baal and Mot address seasonal anxieties, drought when a storm god is absent, and legitimize ritual and royal responses. They make transit an occasion for public ritual, lament, and renewed kingship. In a solid context, the social problem is how to secure a name across generations. Ancestor cult, memorial feasts, and genealogical recitation are the practical technologies that guard continuity. And thus, transit in Levantine literature alternates between spectacular political myth and modest domestic care, both answering the same human fear in different keys. So, if you prefer your underworld with a courtly scandal and heroic rescue, go Ugaritic. If you like quiet municipal finality, read Sheol. Either way, keep your messengers well paid and your prayers in order. The weather and the remembered name both depend on them. Court and Inhabitants. Mod's Court, Anat's Rage, and the Silent Shades. Mod's Court is less a kindly palace than a pit of policy, a place where hunger is law and silence keeps the records. In Ugaritic myth, Mod is not merely death as an abstract fact, but a personified sovereign whose realm devours king's shadows and whose appetite explains the land's sterility. When Baal falls or is seized, it is Mod's authority that briefly governs the world. The sky goes quiet, the fields fail, and the divine table is empty until the household of the gods either placates or undoes the seizure. This is political theology made visible. Drought, kingship, and mortality are bound together in a royal drama. The cast of the Nether Court is stark and dramatic. Mod sits as Lord of the Pit. Anat is the furious king who digs, rends, and demands restoration, a warlike rescuer whose violence against Mod underscores both familial loyalty and the community's need for renewal. The Baal cycle stages Anat's wrath as a theatrical counterforce. She arms herself, tears at gates, and offers absurdly thorough violence in order to recover Baal or avenge his loss. That fury is not gratuitous spectacle, but an ideological move. The goddess's rage reasserts cosmic order by confronting the devouring power at its seat. The sun shades of the Levantine netherworld are closer to Mesopotamia's house of dust than to an Egyptian field of plenty. Ugaritic and Hebraic texts depict the dead as shadowy inhabitants whose being is attenuated. Sheol in the Hebrew corpus functions as a common fate, a gloomy abode where both mighty and lowly end up alike, and where the living's memory is, but the most secures, a kind of continuing presence. The mythology thus combines dramatic divine theatre, Baal, Anat, Mod, with a social bottom line. Ordinary mortals face a somber sameness in the hereafter, unless the living maintain remembrance and ritual. Material practice and cult respond to those beliefs in two registers. In cities like Ugaritic, the palace poetry prescribes ritual responses to crisis. Feast, lament, and royal rite that perform restoration. In domestic life, funerary and commemorative practices, offerings, lamentation, and genealogical memory function to keep ancestors present in family and village life. The myths provide a script for public ritual and royal legitimacy. The household rites supply the everyday technology that protects ordinary dead from oblivion. Together, they form a cultural economy in which myth gives meaning and ritual keeps the accounts. Fate, function, and cultural work, Drought, dynasty, and the social afterlife. The 11th underworld closes on a very human ledger. When a storm god is absent, the land cracks, and when a household forgets the dead taste only dust. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? So again, let's break it down. First, the short, blunt fact, Drought and dynasty. In Ugaritic poetry, the absence of Baal is not a private misfortune, but a public calamity. When Baal falls to mud, the rains stop, the fields fail, and the king's capacity to secure fertility is visibly broken. The Baal mud episodes, therefore, function as mythic diagnoses and, of course, political drama. And they explain Drought as the consequence of a ruptured cosmic kingship and provide a narrative that ritual and royal action must prepare. Second, ritual and royal response, myth as instruction manuals. Because those poems do real work. Palace rites, feasts, public lament, and ritual drama are the community's answers. The narrative prescribes how the king, his household, and cult specialists must respond to restore order. Scholarly editions and commentaries on the Baal cycle show how this sequence of loss and retrieval furnishes ritual script for the polity, and myths providing both explanation and a template for communal action. Third, Sheol and the social afterlife. The sober bottom line. So, by contrast, the Hebrew notion of Sheol is a social equalizer, a somber, shadowy house where great and small alike descend. Sheol is often pictured as a place of gloom and silence, rather than a site of reward or detailed judgment. The moral work falls to the living, whose, again, remembrance and family cult determine a nameless persistence in the social record. The biblical texts and classical reference summaries treat Sheol as finality. The civic problem is therefore not rescue, but commemoration. Fourth, household technologies, offerings, lament, and, importantly, memory. You see, across the Levant, the practical technologies that defend a name are largely domestic. Offerings and tombs, genealogically recitation, lamentation, and seasonal festivals that bind ancestors to the living polity. Where Ugaritic myth supplies the high theatre, Anat's fury bars disappearance, and the household performs the day-to-day labor that keeps our shade from fading. Archaeological and textual studies show local funerary practices and memorial installations that function as the region's real insurance policy against oblivion. And lastly, fifth, mythic exceptions and their lessons. Basically, drama as pedagogy. Again. So, the myths offer exceptional scripts. Anat's violence appeals to El, or ritual compensations, that dramatize how order might be restored. They are pedagogic tales. They justify ritual sequence, legitimate royal action, and teach communities the cause of neglect. In short, Levantine traditions do not so much weigh morality as bind ecology, kingship, and communal memory into a single cultural answer to death. If you worry about drought, check the ritual calendar. If you worry about being forgotten, check whether your descendants have any appetite for lamentation. Either way, someone has to do their funerary bookkeeping.